The man who fixed broken pianos for 40 years had never once let anyone hear him play. People in Harlan thought it was modesty. It wasn't modesty. It was that the moment his fingers touched a keyboard for real, the wrong people would know he was still breathing. And on a cold Thursday in October, a 19-year-old music student was about to find out why. From which city in the world are you watching this story today? Drop it in the comments below. And if you love stories about people history tried to erase, subscribe now, because what this old man hid inside a tuning fork made 2 federal agents go pale in a dusty repair shop, and one of them whispered a code name that had been classified for 50 years. The bell over the door of Vance Instrument Repair rang at 8:02 in the morning, 2 minutes after Edgar Vance flipped the sign to open. He never opened early. He never opened late. In a town where most businesses ran on a loose understanding of time, Edgar Vance ran on something closer to a metronome. He was 78 years old, narrow through the shoulders, with hands that looked too large for his thin wrists. His hair was white and combed straight back, and he wore the same thing every day: a grey cardigan, a pressed shirt buttoned to the collar, and reading glasses on a thin chain. He smelled faintly of felt and machine oil, and the peppermints he kept in a tin by the register. The shop sat on the corner of Main and Sycamore, in a small Kentucky town, wedged between 2 ridges. It was the kind of place where the mountains came down close to the road, and the light arrived late in the morning and left early in the afternoon. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves of tuning hammers, felt strips, coils of piano wire, and rows of small drawers labeled in handwriting so precise it looked typed. Edgar had run the shop alone since his wife died. He tuned pianos, repaired accordions, restrung guitars, and fixed the occasional church organ. He did the work slowly and perfectly. People drove from 3 counties over because nobody touched an instrument the way Edgar Vance did. They said he could hear a string go flat before the note even finished. What they did not know was that this was literally true, and that it had once kept 7 men alive. But that part of the story stayed buried under 40 years of routine. The girl who walked in that Thursday was named June Halloway. She was 19, a sophomore at the State College 2 hours north, home for the week because her grandmother had fallen and needed help around the house. June carried a worn canvas bag and a battered leather case, and she had the slightly defensive posture of a person who had been talked down to a lot. "I need to sell something," she said, "and maybe get it appraised, if that's a thing you do." Edgar set down the felt punch he'd been holding. "Depends what it is." June unzipped the canvas bag and pulled out an object wrapped in a yellowed cloth. She set it on the counter and unfolded it carefully, the way you handle something you don't fully understand but suspect might matter. It was a tuning fork, not an ordinary one. It was longer than the cheap steel forks Edgar kept in a cup by the register, and heavier, made of some dark alloy that didn't quite shine. The 2 tines were perfectly machined. The handle was thicker than normal, almost square, and along one face ran a line of tiny stamped characters, half of them worn nearly smooth. Edgar did not move. "It was my great-uncle's," June said, filling the silence the way nervous people do. "He passed last spring, 91. Nobody in the family really knew him. He lived alone up in Maryland, kind of a recluse. When they cleaned out his apartment, they found a box with my grandmother's name on it. This was inside, with a note that just said, 'Give to someone who tunes by ear, not by machine.' My grandma doesn't know what to do with it. I figured maybe it's worth something. College isn't cheap." Edgar still hadn't picked it up. "You all right?" June asked. "Fine," he said. His voice came out a half-step lower than usual. "Just thinking." He reached for the fork, the way a man reaches toward a stove he isn't sure is hot. His fingers closed around the square handle, and something in his face changed. A tightening around the eyes gone in an instant, replaced by the patient blankness he wore like a coat. "I haven't seen one of these in a long time," he said quietly. "So it's worth something?" "It's worth being careful with." He turned it over. The stamped characters caught the light. June leaned in. "I tried to look those up online. It's not a normal serial number. It starts with letters." "No," Edgar agreed. "It isn't normal." What he didn't say was that he had personally carried a fork exactly like this across 2 borders sewn into the lining of a coat, and that he had not expected to ever see another one again. But that wasn't the part that frightened him. The part that frightened him came next. Edgar carried the fork to the workbench at the back of the shop, where a gooseneck lamp threw a hard pool of light over a felt mat. He took up a jeweler's loupe and bent close. June watched his shoulders. They had gone rigid. The stamping read NSA-CRYPT/FT-9/1968/S-7. Edgar read it 3 times. He had told himself for half a century that the past was sealed, that the men who knew his name were dead, that the program had been shredded into smoke. He had built a life out of small repeated motions precisely because small repeated motions did not get a man noticed. He tuned. He swept the floor. He locked up at 5. He had married a kind woman who never once asked what he did before he came to Harlan, and he had loved her for that more than for anything else. And now a teenager was standing in his shop holding a piece of his erased life and asking what it was worth. "Where exactly did your great-uncle work?" Edgar asked, keeping his voice level. "I don't really know. Government, I think. My grandma said he did something with radios during the Cold War, but he never talked about it." "Why?" Edgar set the loupe down. "What was his name?" "Halloway. Same as mine. Thomas Halloway. People called him Tom." The name landed in Edgar's chest like a dropped stone. He had not heard that name spoken aloud in 50 years. The last time, it had been over a crackling line in a basement in a city that no longer existed under the name it had then, and the voice on the other end had been telling him that Halloway was burned, that the network was collapsing, that everyone needed to scatter and never look back. Edgar's hand found the edge of the workbench. "Mr. Vance," June said, "you went white." "Sit down," Edgar said. "I'll make tea, and then I think I need to tell you something I have never told anyone." But the words barely left his mouth before something interrupted them, and it changed everything. The interruption was the sound of his own front door. A man stepped inside. Mid-40s, dark coat, the kind of haircut that costs money and tries not to look like it. He wore good shoes for a town that didn't have any reason to demand good shoes, and he scanned the room in a single smooth sweep, corners, exits, hands, before his eyes settled, pleasant and empty, on Edgar. "Morning," the man said. "Hope I'm not interrupting. I'm looking for the owner." "You found him," Edgar said. "Edgar Vance?" "That's the name on the sign." The man smiled. He did not offer his own name. "I'm doing some research on old instrument shops in the region. Estate stuff, mostly. Wondering if you've come across any unusual antique pieces lately. Forks, calibration tools, that kind of thing. Government surplus sometimes turns up in these mountain towns." The shop went very quiet. June, to her enormous credit, said nothing at all, but Edgar saw her hand drift, slow and casual, to slide the yellowed cloth back over the fork on the counter. The man's eyes flicked toward the motion, just once. "Can't say I have," Edgar said. "Mostly I get accordions and church pianos. Folks around here don't have much that's worth surplusing." "Sure," the man said. "Of course." He let the silence stretch, then nodded, as if making a decision. "If anything turns up, I'd be grateful for a call." He set a plain white card on the counter, no name, just a phone number. Then he left. The bell rang, the door shut, and for a long moment neither Edgar nor June moved. "That," June said finally, "was not a man who collects antiques." "No," Edgar said. "He was not." He picked up the white card, looked at the number, and felt something he had not felt in 50 years and had genuinely hoped to die without feeling again. It was not quite fear. It was the cold, clarifying focus that comes right before fear, the one that had once let him sit motionless in a freezing church loft for 9 hours with a headset pressed to his ear, listening. "June," he said. "How many people know you brought that here?" she thought. "My grandma. That's it. I didn't even tell anyone I was coming into town today. Then someone is watching this fork, not you." He set the card down. "And the only way they could be watching this fork is if it just went into a database somewhere. Did you photograph it? Post it? Email anyone? Her face fell. I uploaded a picture to a collector forum 2 days ago, asking what the stamp meant. Nobody answered. Edgar closed his eyes. Somebody answered, he said. Just not in the comments. He locked the front door and turned the sign to closed, though it was barely 9 in the morning. Then he made the tea after all, because his hands needed something to do, and he sat across from June at the little table by the window where he ate his lunch most days, and he told her, "My name is not Edgar Vance," he began. "Or, it is now. It has been longer than it was ever anything else. But the boy who was born was named Alexander, and he grew up in a country that does not draw its borders the same way anymore." June wrapped both hands around her mug and did not interrupt. "I had an ear," Edgar said, "from the time I was small. I could hear when a string was a few cents flat. I could hear 2 pitches that other people swore were the same and tell you which was higher. To my mother it was a parlor trick. To certain men, when I was 19, your age, it was a weapon." He turned the fork over in his fingers as he spoke. "There was a program. It does not appear in any history book you will ever read. The idea was simple and strange. In those years, before computers could do everything, a great deal of secret communication moved through sound, radio tones, telephone signaling, the clicks and pulses of teletype. And a piano, a real ordinary upright piano, is one of the most precise tone generators a human being can carry into a room without anyone thinking twice about it. "You hid messages in piano music," June said slowly. "We hid them, and we read them. A piano tuner can walk into any building in any city in the world and no one questions him. He carries a case of forks and hammers. He sits at the instrument for an hour. He plays scales, chords, single notes over and over, listening, perfectly innocent, perfectly invisible." Edgar tapped the dark fork. This calibrated the system. Each fork was cut to a frequency that wasn't quite any musical note. The deviation from the true pitch, that was the key. You tuned to the fork, then you played. And a man in another room with another fork could hear in your mistakes a message that no microphone and no recording could ever decode, because to anyone listening it just sounded like a tuner doing his job badly. He turned the fork slowly in the lamplight. "Do you understand how perfect that is?" he said. "A recording captures the sound, yes. But the message was never in the sound. It was in the distance between 2 sounds. The space between the note you expected and the note I gave you. You cannot record a space. You cannot wiretap a silence. The only instrument that could read it was a human ear trained for 10,000 hours to hear the beats between 2 strings. There were perhaps a few dozen such ears in the world. 7 of them worked the tones." June stared at the fork as if it had grown teeth. "And the stamp, S7. "There were 7 of us in the cell that used these tones," Edgar said. "We were given numbers, not names, when we worked. I was S7, Station 7. He set the fork down very gently. "Your great-uncle, Tom Halloway. He wasn't one of the 7. He was the man on the American side who ran us, the handler, the one who got us out when it fell apart." The realization moved across June's face. "He kept your fork." "He must have. After I crossed over, after they gave me a new name and a new country, and told me to disappear into a small town and never play a piano for an audience as long as I lived." Edgar's voice thinned. "I assumed every fork had been destroyed. The program was a ghost. Officially, the 7 of us did not exist. Officially, I died in a border crossing in 1972, shot in a river. There is a record of it. I have seen it. You're on a list of dead people." "I am a name on a wall," Edgar said. "I have been told. A memorial wall, in a building most people never enter. My number, anyway. They never put the real names." June was quiet for a long moment. Then she said the thing that made Edgar's stomach drop. "So if that man knows the fork exists," she said, "and the fork proves a dead man is alive, then you're not safe, are you? Either way you go. Either they want to bury it again, or..." Edgar agreed. And then his phone rang. The shop phone. The old black rotary on the wall behind the counter that had not rung in so long he sometimes forgot it was connected. He looked at June. June looked at him. He walked to it slowly and lifted the receiver. "Vance Instrument Repair," he said. A voice he did not recognize, level and careful, said, "Don't go anywhere, and don't call anyone. We're not the ones who came in this morning, we're the ones trying to get to you before they do." The line went dead. For 10 minutes nobody came. Edgar used them well. He moved through the shop the way he'd once moved through hostile cities, without hurry, without wasted motion. He took the dark fork and wrapped it in 3 layers of felt, and set it inside a battered accordion case, among a dozen ordinary forks, where it became one unremarkable tool among many. He took June's photograph of it off her phone and made her delete it from the cloud. He turned off the lights in the front so the shop looked closed and dark, and he sat her in the back room where she could not be seen from the street. "Why are you helping me hide it?" June whispered. "It's mine. It's worth money. Maybe a lot of money." "It is worth nothing if you are not alive to spend it," Edgar said. "And it is worth a great deal more than money to the people who want it. That is a dangerous kind of object to own." "Then why didn't you just tell me to take it and run?" Edgar paused. It was a fair question, and he gave it an honest answer. "Because for 50 years, he said, I have been a dead man who tuned pianos, and I am tired of being dead. Your great-uncle kept this fork for half a century. He could have burned it. He didn't. He sent it to someone who tunes by ear, not by machine, because he knew that one day it would find its way to the one man left who could say what it was. He was leaving a door open for me." Edgar looked at the case. "I think he wanted me to be able to come back, if I ever found the courage." The black SUV arrived at 9:40, but it was not the only vehicle. Right behind it came a second car, plain and gray, and the two pulled in nose to tail like dogs that did not trust each other. Out of the SUV stepped the man from the morning, the one with the good shoes, and a second man built like a door. Out of the gray car stepped a woman and a younger man, both in unremarkable jackets, both moving with the same trained economy. Edgar watched through the gap in the blinds and understood at once. 2 groups, not one. "Stay back here," he murmured to June. "Whatever you hear, you stay where I can't see you, and they can't either. There's a case behind the 3rd shelf, in the gap behind the felt rolls. That one has the ordinary forks in it. If this goes wrong, you take that case and you go out the alley door, loud, so they follow you and not the real one. The real one stays with me. Do you understand me?" "You want them to chase me with the fake," June whispered. "I want them looking at the wrong hand," Edgar said. "It is the oldest trick there is, and it is old because it works. Do you understand me?" "Mr. Vance, do you understand me?" She nodded, white-faced. He unlocked the front door before they could knock and stepped out onto his own threshold into the cold mountain morning. An old man in a gray cardigan, blinking mildly in the light. "You're early for an appointment," he said. "I don't open till—" "Mr. Vance," said the woman from the gray car, cutting across him, holding up a folded leather wallet with a badge inside. "Federal, I need you to step away from these 2 gentlemen and come with me. Right now." "And I," said the man with the good shoes smoothly, not showing any badge at all, "would advise Mr. Vance to do no such thing." The 2 of them looked at each other across Edgar's small parking lot, and the air went tight as a tuned string. What happened in the next 4 minutes, June would later struggle to describe, because most of it happened in a language she did not speak. The man with the good shoes said something low and fast to the woman. The woman answered in the same clipped foreign sounds. Edgar's head turned slowly between them, and something woke up behind his eyes. Comprehension. He understood every word. The man with the good shoes was not American. The woman was. "They want to know," Edgar said quietly, to no one and everyone, "whether I am S7. They are both quite sure I died in 1972. One of them would like me to stay dead. The other one is not so sure what she wants." "Sir," the woman said sharply, in English now, "do not say anything else out loud." "Why not?" Edgar said. "It's the only thing I've wanted to say for 50 years. He reached into the pocket of his cardigan. Both men's hands moved toward their coats. And Edgar drew out a tuning fork, the dark one. He had not hidden it after all. He had hidden a decoy and kept the real one against his chest, an old habit from an old life. He held it up so the worn stamp caught the light. NSA-CRYPT, he read aloud, calm as a man reading a grocery list. FT-9, 1968, S-7. He lowered it. I tuned the church loft on Vodnar Street for 9 hours in the winter of 1971, and I passed 17 extraction signals through a hymn nobody questioned, and I got 4 families across a border that does not exist anymore. My handler was Thomas Halloway. He is dead now. I would like, before I follow him, to stop being a corpse. The man with the good shoes said something short and ugly in his own language and took a step forward. The woman moved faster. She put herself between him and Edgar, badge still in her hand, and what she said next, she said in his language, not hers, so that he would understand it was meant for him and not for her own report. Edgar translated it later, softly, for June. She had said, "You do not get to erase this one twice. The man with the good shoes did not draw a weapon. Men like him almost never did, in places with traffic cameras and witnesses." He simply looked at Edgar for a long moment, recalculating, and Edgar saw the exact instant the man understood that the math had changed, that an erased asset who stayed erased was an asset, but an erased asset standing in the sun on his own doorstep with a federal officer between them and a teenage witness in the building was something else entirely. A liability, a scandal, a thread that, if pulled, would unravel things that powerful people on more than one continent had spent 50 years keeping wound up tight. "This is a misunderstanding," the man said in English, smooth again. "We were never here." "You were here," Edgar said. "She saw you. The girl inside saw you. And I will remember your shoes." The man's jaw tightened. He turned, said one word to his companion, and they got back into the black SUV and drove away up Sycamore without hurry, the way men leave when they want you to think they chose to. The woman watched them all the way out of sight. Only then did she let out a breath. "Mr. Vance," she said, turning to him, "or I'm not sure what to call you." "Edgar will do," he said. "It's the name my wife knew me by." The younger agent had come around the car. He was perhaps 30, and he was staring at Edgar the way a person stares at something they have only ever read about. "Station 7, he said, almost to himself. "We have your transmission logs, the Vodnar hymn. We study it. It's a textbook case. We were taught you were killed in the crossing. Everyone is taught that." "I have read my own death certificate," Edgar said. "It says I drowned. I have never been a strong swimmer, so I suppose it was plausible." The young agent did not laugh. Instead, slowly, the way the man in the gun shop story might have, he brought his hand up to his brow in a salute, crisp and held, and he kept it there until Edgar, embarrassed, looked away. "Don't," Edgar said quietly. "I didn't do it for that." "I know," the young agent said. "That's why." They did not take Edgar away in a black SUV. The woman, whose name turned out to be Reyes, made a series of phone calls from her car, and what she arranged was not a disappearance, but the opposite of one. She came back inside the shop, where June had finally emerged from the back room, and she sat down at the little lunch table and laid it out plainly. "The program you served is being partially declassified," she said. "It has been in process for 2 years. Most of the men who ran it on our side are dead. The ones who are left wanted the record cleaned up before they go, not for politics, just so the truth exists somewhere that isn't a sealed box. We thought all the field operators were gone. The forks were supposed to have been destroyed in 1973. She nodded at the dark fork on the table. "When that photograph went up on a collector forum 2 days ago, it tripped an old alert. We weren't the only ones it tripped. The other side never forgets an open file either." "So Tom kept one," Edgar said. "Your handler broke protocol to keep one," Reyes said. "We're honestly not sure why, but I think you know." Edgar looked at June. "I think he kept a door open," he said. "And I think he trusted the right person to walk through it eventually." June, who had been silent through almost all of it, finally spoke. Her voice shook only a little. "I just wanted to pay for tuition." For the first time that morning, Edgar laughed. It surprised everyone, including him. "And you may yet," he said. "Though I would suggest you keep the fork. Some things are worth more than what a collector would pay. Your great-uncle understood that. He spent his whole life understanding that. It took 8 weeks. The declassification announcement, when it came, was 3 dry paragraphs from a government office, the kind of thing that scrolls past the bottom of a news broadcast and is forgotten by lunch. A Cold War signals program, never previously acknowledged, conducted between certain years, in certain places, partially unsealed for historical record. No drama, no names. The cover stories of empires do not break loudly, they erode. But a hearing was scheduled, a quiet one, in a wood-paneled room in front of a small panel to enter testimony and documents into the permanent record. And Edgar Vance, who had been a name on a wall and a body in a river and a corpse in a sealed file, was asked to come and say, out loud and for the record, that he had been alive the whole time. He drove up the day before. June came with him, because by then it would have been strange for her not to. She had visited the shop nearly every day of those 8 weeks, and somewhere in there Edgar had started teaching her to tune by ear, the real way, the slow way, the way that listens to the beats between 2 strings until they vanish into one clean tone. In the hearing room there were perhaps 20 people. A few were very old. One arrived in a wheelchair and wore a faded pin that meant nothing to anyone in the room except the 2 other men who wore the same one and the agent named Reyes who stood when he entered. Edgar testified for 19 minutes. He brought the fork. He explained in plain language what it was and what it had done, and how a hymn played slightly wrong in a frozen church loft had moved 4 families across a line on a map. He did not embellish. He had never been a man who embellished. He named the church on Vodnar Street, the winter of 1971, the 9 hours in the loft with frost forming on the inside of the windows and a headset cold against his ear. He named the 17 signals, and what each one had meant, and which families had lived because of them. When he was finished, he set the fork down on the table in front of the panel like a man laying down something he had carried a very long way. "I was told to stay dead," he said in closing. "For 50 years I obeyed. I tuned pianos and I loved a good woman, and I told no one anything, not even her, and she never asked, which is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me. I do not regret the quiet, but I am old now, and the men who knew the truth are dying, and I find I do not want the truth to die with us. There were 7 of us. I am the last. I would like the record to show that we were real, that we were not heroes in any way that makes a good film, and that we did the work and went home, most of us to graves with the wrong names, or no names at all." He paused, and his voice, which had been steady for 19 minutes, finally caught. "Station 1 was a schoolteacher. Station 3 played in a cafe and was the funniest man I ever knew. They are gone. Let it at least be written down that they were here." In the silence after, the old man in the wheelchair raised one trembling hand to his brow. And then, the way it happens, slowly, one at a time until it is everyone, the room stood up. Edgar Vance did not become famous. That is not how these stories truly end, whatever the films pretend. The hearing entered 3 boxes of documents into a permanent archive. His real number was added to a list beside 6 others, and a single line in a single database was quietly changed from deceased to status corrected. Almost no one would ever read it. But something did change in the small Kentucky town wedged between 2 ridges. The shop reopened. The sign still said, "Vance Instrument Repair," because that was still his name, the one that mattered most, the one his wife had loved him by. He still opened at 8 and closed at 5 and smelled of felt and machine oil and peppermint. People still drove 3 counties over because nobody touched an instrument the way Edgar Vance did. But now, on quiet afternoons, the door of the shop was sometimes propped open, and from inside came the sound of a piano being played, really played, by an old man and a young woman taking turns, the music drifting out onto Main Street and up toward the ridges. Sometimes it was a little wrong on purpose, the two of them laughing, June trying to send a message in the deviations the way he'd taught her, Edgar shaking his head and saying flat, "You're flat, listen," and June listening, and getting it, and the two pitches sliding together into one clean note that hung in the air and then was gone. The dark fork sat in a small glass case on the wall, beside a photograph of 7 young people standing in a doorway in a city that no longer exists under the name it had then. Below it, a card in Edgar's precise handwriting read only, "Tuned by ear, 1968 to 1972, Station 7, the last one home." He had spent 50 years being silent so the wrong people would not know he was breathing. He spent the rest of his life making sure the right ones would never forget. Have you ever known someone who carried an enormous truth quietly, for years, without anyone around them ever guessing? Tell us about them in the comments. And if you believe some truths deserve to be heard no matter how long they've been buried, subscribe. There are more of these stories, more people who were erased and deserve to be remembered. Because silence can keep a person safe, but it should never be the last thing said about them.